Ba-da-ba-ba-ba, I'm not loving it. I'm beginning to worry that I'm experiencing blackouts, because I could have sworn I just went into Target to get some groceries, and the next thing I know I'm in the car, with this guy in the passenger seat. But here I am now behind the camera to review Batman of Zur-En-Arrh from McFarlane Toys. Otherwise known as I like to call him McDonald's Batman. Because there's nothing else that I can think of when looking at this color scheme than a delicious McRib. Bring it back, please. Now, I understand that I had to kind of put my ignorance aside because when this McFarlane Toys was first unveiled, I legitimately thought that McFarlane was just kind of out of ideas, and they were just kind of stringing together a new original take on Batman just to kind of crank out a figure and put something kind of outlandish in there to get people talking. And people talking they did, most notably me, because prior to that unveilment, I actually never heard of Zur-En-Arrh Batman. I mean, I've seen this color scheme before, but I just thought that it was kind of like a makeshift thing just for the sake of having a very colorful Batman. I just didn't know that he was his own character. Upon my own personal research prior to recording this, I finally figured out that Zur-En-Arrh Batman really trails back all the way to the Silver Age of comics in the 1950s, where an alien named Talia, I believe, kind of modeled himself after Batman of Earth, so he kind of created this personality, or this rather kind of iteration of Batman, except he purposely chose these really garish colors to stand out and actually attract enemies as opposed to hiding from the shadows. Whereas the Zur-En-Arrh Batman of the 2000s, spearheaded by Grant Morrison in the comics, is basically an actual different mental personality of Batman. It more designed to be a failsafe in the event that Batman himself does in fact go crazy, and therefore that would explain not only the crazy costume but also the arsenal of weapons that he resorts to using because of his broken psyche. And that's the more, I guess you could say, gritty and darker iteration of Zur-En-Arrh Batman, that if upon looking closer at the figure, you can tell McFarlane took a harder inspiration of that version more so than the Silver Age comics version. And that's very plain to see past the very loud color scheme, which again, it's very difficult to not think of everybody's favorite fast food clown when looking at this costume because of the predominant color usage of the, what I like to call, ketchup red amongst the predominant portion of the torso of the suit, with various accents of purple, yellow, and black, most notably in the cowl, the cape, the gauntlets, boots, and utility belt. It's funny because out of everything, the one thing that stays true to Batman's usual color scheme of his costume is the utility belt being yellow, but apart from that, the sleeves then take on this kind of matted yellow color, as well as the little spot behind the black symbol. Now, here's the thing, though crazy as this kind of costume layout may be, it at least gets points for creativity, because at least they went for a scheme or an assemblement of those colors that at least is a little easier to swallow as opposed to the inverse. I mean, think about it. They could have made the costume, or I'm sorry, the cowl and the cape yellow and then the sleeves purple, as opposed to the other way around that we actually received here. So they knew exactly where to map the colors versus the various parts of his body. And also there's little details here and there that you cannot blame McFarlane to gravitate towards when it comes to putting out a figure based on this iteration of Batman. Specifically, the spikes here on the shoulders, you can kind of see things kind of trail off from there that have this much more gothic nature, as well as, of course, the bat symbol, which I really do like the actual design of it in and of itself, as well as the very small little details of having the costume be stitched up because it's, you know, weird and tethered, kind of similar to this broken version of his personality, and you can see that coming along around the areas of the chest and the thighs. The laces tying up the gauntlets and the boots can also be shown there, as well as the very twisted nature of the cowl. I know it doesn't really stand out, it's much more on the subtle angle of things, but you can kind of see that the cowl has this angular kind of aesthetic to it, as well as the ears being a little kind of strung out towards the sides and kind of crooked, kind of resembling, like I said, how much crazier he has become, as well as the much slightly sicklier nature of his mouth, as well as just the way he overall looks with his complexion. It just doesn't look right, but that's kind of the point. He's supposed supposed to look a little off-putting, a little off-kilter. And for the first time in a while, his cape is a bit more widespread than usual. Now, one thing to consider, I guess you could kind of say as a word of caution, is that even though they decided to go with a much white span coverage as far as his cape is concerned versus some of the more recent McFarlanes that I've covered that are a bit more on the narrower side. And I also appreciate all the little creases and moldings of detail. They also went with a slightly thinner piece of plastic, or I'm sorry, rubber, to actually kind of throw in for the cape itself, to the point where it's so thin that, as usual, the cape is kind of put through this little slit inside of the plastic that holds the figure inside of the box. So when removing him from said plastic, do be careful, because you do run the risk of causing a bit of a wear and tear on the ridges and sides here of the cape itself due to how thin it actually is. Unfortunately, the positives kind of end there, because one noticeable design choice that I just cannot get behind are these bow-legged legs. I mean, look at them. Look at these sausages. I have some admiration for how thick they made his legs out to be. I mean, he did not skip leg day whatsoever, and I can appreciate that. I really can. I can respect it. But I do not respect just how jank his bottom legs look. When you take the calves into consideration, I'm not 100% certain the anatomy is supposed to work that way. Now, granted, I can kind of, counteract myself, because I'm always praising how well some of the articulation is able to turn 360 degrees, and then people often remind me that it's not supposed to turn that way. But it's one thing for the articulation to at least provide me the opportunities for certain posabilities. It's another thing to have certain poses just look completely downright wrong when his legs look like this. I mean, just look at the way everything is just slanted. You start off on a vertical, straightforward position here at the top of the leg, and then it just kind of skewers, boom, in that direction with these calves and these lower parts of the legs below the knee. It just doesn't look right. And even more so, it doesn't do me any favors when both the bow-leggedness of these parts as well as the looseness of the ankles are not exactly benefiting the figure from getting any sure footing with any kind of pose whatsoever. In fact, it took me quite a while to get him into a worthwhile pose just to get this review started. And even then, I have to be delicate with the table, because I've done this review already a number of takes, and each and every single time, you see right there, it just wants to give way. And I have this review to thank for careful inspection of the figure, leading me to then notice some splotches going on with the paint applications behind the bat symbol. I do understand that they had to put that little yellow circle behind the bat symbol to kind of give it a proper sense of emphasis on the bat symbol, but at least the paint they used could have been a little bit on the thicker side, because it only looks like they applied one coat and it's starting to kind of separate there towards the bottom, along with a little bit of splotching from the black of the bat symbol itself. And though the robustness of the knees is definitely felt with just how thick the plastic comes through, giving him some added weight, the arms, not so much. The plastic they used, it's almost like they ran out of time. I don't know if somebody put forth a deadline on Zur-En-Arrh Batman, but god damn, they just full on rushed the figure as far as production is concerned, because all of this feels like it was made under one solicitor or manufacturer, and then the arms were just kind of pegged on via a different one that used that hollow plastic. All this feels out like one solid piece, but then when you get to the arms, you can definitely see it from the movement itself. It's just light as a feather, and therefore it just feels kind of cheap in retrospect. I guess while we're on the subject of movement, let's go ahead and tackle said articulation. Now, thankfully, the head is still able to do what most McFarlanes can, rotate at the 360 degree horizontal level, as well as being able to pivot up and down very well and side to side. So not much really going on right there in any kind of direction, still being able to do it justice. But when it comes to those really weak and hollowed out, cheap feeling arms, Well, the articulation actually kind of stays in place, so at least I'm thankful for that. It's just very, very smooth and kind of glides on over that it just doesn't feel right, even though it's able to get the points across like other McFarlanes traditionally do. You're able to vertically rotate 360 degrees. Mind you, the spikes here on the shoulder via their design is of course going to impede that slightly when you're rotated all the way around. So just notice that you are going to be gliding almost all the way across as you move it vertically because of the molding that this takes place. Otherwise, you are able to extend vertically towards the side via no ratchetiness found inside of the ball joint of the shoulder whatsoever. So like you saw before, it just kind of moves up and down very freely, but again, there's a little bit of looseness due to just how cheap it all just kind of feels. So it just doesn't feel right. Now, the butterfly joint is still found in there, except it just doesn't shrug or move in any kind of direction as much as I would have hoped. So that's slightly disappointing. The bicep swivel is still found there, so it's able to easily rotate 360 degrees, as well as being able to bend at the elbow via the two joints freely. That one is miraculously ratcheted, so it's able to give you a little bit of added heft to not have it be kind of just wiggling all over the place as found by the cheapness of the plastic. And then the wrists can definitely rotate 360 degrees, as well as being able to move inwards and outwards via the hinge. But lo and behold, they are loose, so being able to move them is super, super easy, to the point where any slight movement is able to move them via no effort at all. Mid-torso joint is still there, allowing it to rotate 360 degrees. Surprisingly and mildly ironic, this is actually the only joint so far that is ratcheted. In fact, there's a very loud click when I turn it from its left side towards the right, so I found that pretty fascinating. It is able to crunch backwards. It's able to extend backwards, but unfortunately no crunching of any kind. It's almost like this piece was made out to be a little longer than the one on behind them, so therefore it's giving that opposite movement versus other McFarlanes that I've tested out. He is, however, able to crunch from left to right, so movement is found there. No waste of articulation of any kind, but when we get to the top leg joints, we find a little bit more heartbreak, because though he was able to really work out on leg day, it unfortunately didn't do him any favors in the form of movement, because leg movement at the top of the leg joints is only able to go forward about that far, at least on the right leg. The left leg is a bit more on the generous side, as you can see right there, but hefty resistance is felt on the right one when moving it upwards. And you can practically forget about movement towards the back, because of course this rubber crotch piece is going to restrict it, as most McFarlanes tend to do. However, extension is still there, and it's actually found very generously, as you can see right there. Now, I don't know if this is going to be found on all of the Zur-En-Arrh Batmans, but I do notice that the left leg, which is able to again have better extension towards the front, is also capable of some slight swivel from side to side, although I do feel like that's partly accidental, because I notice that the right one cannot do that. If both of them were able to do that, then I would say that maybe that's a little form of leverage that was found due to the way that these legs are constructed, but I feel like I just stumbled upon a happy accident. Then we get to the knees inside of the goddamn Bolex found there. However, they still sport the two joints that are able to give them the bending all the way up towards the top, as you see right there, so no exception found there. And then moving to the really loose and janky ass ankles, nevertheless they are able to rotate 360 degrees, as well as being able to pivot downwards slightly like so, and upwards like that. I will provide a note here, however, that when taking him out of the box, some of these joints inside of the ankles were kind of put together at a factory level in a very janked up kind of way that I actually had to finesse a little bit with the ankles themselves to have them pointed in the right direction. If you look a little closer, you'll notice a little circular disc inside of the ball joints to kind of give you a sense of where they're supposed to be facing, preferably inwards. Like that little circle is supposed to be on the inside portion of the ankle, facing almost at the adjacent ankle. And it wasn't like that. It was almost like completely turned around, almost like this. But the ankle, the actual foot itself, was facing in the forward position. So you could see how there was an awful lot of conflict going on right there when I was trying to like bend, and I was like, whoa, is this thing kind of messed up? So mine came that way. It's possible that yours may also do so as well. And the toes are still able to bend right about right there. I did find that similar to Titan Joker, mine felt like they were closer to the middle part of the foot rather than the toes themselves, but they can do so right there, especially to provide some extra support when those ankles just become a little too irksome. So designs got some problems. Articulation's got some problems. Where does he fare off in the accessories? Well, that's actually the one department that genuinely did make me go, okay, this is the version of McFarlane that they decided to take on, which is the grittier 2000s Grant Morrison version of Zur-En-Arrh Batman that's modeled after his psychotic breakdown version of his personality. Because the accessories they decided to throw in definitely cements that. You have a knife right here with decent detail. I mean, it's a silver rubber piece of plastic with a brown modeled hilt that kind of makes it look like it's got straps going on right there, like he kind of made it himself. And then a strapped up but also nailed down wood bat. So he's definitely the Batman now. He's going up to bat and fully gonna take on villains in a very Negan style sort of way. But again, these two are very uncharacteristically Batman weapons, and therefore they're supposed to kind of devise a way to tell the story that this is meant to be that psychotic version of Batman. I just wish that they were able to be a bit more friendlier to actually sport in his very clenched up hands, because if you haven't been noticing during the review, his hands are a little bit on the clenched up side, and it's actually the right one that did not give me any kind of wiggle room whatsoever, despite putting it in hot water or blowing it with a hairdryer. This one would not budge at all for either of the accessories, whereas the left one is a bit more on the open side, and therefore through countless tries I was able to finally get both of the weapons inside. And ironically, it's actually the knife that still gives me a little bit of difficulty, but if you just give it some slight force there without trying to. There we go. Okay, so we get him to actually sport the knife in this hand. So there you have him like that. But if you want him make him look even a little bit crazier, at least one little form of argument to have him sport both weapons, you can have him hold the knife blade first, almost like he's going to be throwing it on his right hand, which is the much more clenched up one, and then the left one can actually sport the Negan bat via the handle right here, which is made out of this much more bendable rubber, which thank God, because if it was like a hard plastic, it probably would have broken trying to fit it into that hand, because that's just how rigid it actually is. But you have to give it that extra force nevertheless to finally be able to have him hold it like so. So you're probably able to pick up on the fact that I'm not exactly a huge fan here of Zur-En-Arrh Batman, and strangely enough, it has nothing to do with the design itself, because over time I kind of warmed up to the McDonald's motif. I really did, because it's unique and I have to give them points for said creativity. It's just that as a McFarlane toy, it's becoming very clear that it looked like maybe Todd looked at the design from either the Silver Age Comics version or the Grant Morrison 2000s version and thought to themselves, hey, I like the spikes, I like the gothic nature, let's put out a figure. But the timetable was just not on the cards, especially with the other McFarlanes that they got set up for the summer. I feel like they just squeezed it in there at the last second, and thus would explain either the lack of quality behind the plastic of the arms, or the weak ass ankles, or the bow-leggedness of the top portions of the shins. just ended up resulting in a Batman figure that is a sum of its parts, resulting in me believing that this is not only one of the worst McFarlane figures that I've covered on the channel so far, but probably the first that I will be returning. And unlike the McRib, it's not coming back. However, if you feel like you want to add Zur-En-Arrh Batman from McFarlane Toys to your combo meal, I promise I'm done with the McDonald's buns, then please use the affiliate links in the description below. They help out the channel quite a bit. And in the meantime, check out this other McFarlane toy review showing up on screen right now. And as always, stay humble. I'll see you on the next one.